It is my pleasure to be here, and thank you, Shafan, for the invite. It's wonderful to see as many of you. So what I'm going to do a little bit, give you a background about myself, because I think without the background, you probably won't understand what journey I went through to pass my PhD. So I came to this country as an international student nearly 20 years ago. And I come from Iraq originally, so English is my second language, of course. And although I had good grasp of English when I came, it was imperfect, and certainly my spoken English was much better than my written English, and especially in the field. So I'm an architect by training, and I was working on a research project that crosses multiple disciplines, including engaging with ideas around technology and representation within architecture. So I think we all get this question, and I don't know how many of you in the room have got that question before. Where do you come from? I always answer the question, and I always say I'm originally from Iraq. But I was just counting recently. I have been in this country for longer than I have been in my home country. So I am a first-generation immigrant to this country, if you like. So home to me is a really it's a lucid concept. It kind of moves boundaries, and it's not kind of situated in one place. And I love this quote by Homi Bhabha that really describes exactly how I feel about where I come from and what home means to me. There is a bit about myself in this, because I want to kind of just give you an idea of the journey. So I graduated from Baghdad University. I was born in the 70s, so this is why it's a Generation X. I was born in the 70s. I did my degree in Iraq. I finished my undergraduate and master's, and I was one of the pet, student teacher's pet, and came to this country, knew no one, had no one, and I came on my own. But I also came right after the 2003 invasion. So this is, Iraq had just gone through one of the biggest and most massive damaging kind of breaks into its kind of progression into this world. And coming in June 2000, in fact, literally just at the end of this month, 20 years ago, coming in, I left behind my family. I also left an incredibly wrecked kind of part of my life. And I came on my own. And I was going to start one of the most challenging things to do in someone's life, start a PhD. So just giving you a background of what I was feeling. So I was worried constantly about my parents, and that was like my 90% of the time, engagement with what I was doing. I was also trying to understand what is this world that I came to, because I remember we've been to the UK before as a family holiday, and what was really interesting is that we've never come as far as Devon, and it's always London, which is what people do from outside the world. So we come, if we're going to England, it's London, that's it. And I've been to Edinburgh because my father had his PhD in Edinburgh back in the 70s, so we've been to the country before, but definitely not as far south. And 20 years ago, Plymouth was a really non-place. Like, it was a dying city. It was very difficult to think of it in relation to what it is now, in terms of the progress that it had over the last 20 years. And I wanted to go back, because I came from this hustle-bustle main capital city to an incredibly quiet, very mellow kind of pace city and I was about to get on the bus and go back to Heathrow and go home. But my parents were on the phone saying, "You're not coming back. Where are you coming back to? This is, it's a one-way ticket in a way." So I was a survivor of war, yet I was incredibly feeling guilty about the fact that I left my family behind and they're still in the mess. I felt the race and marginalization here, but I also felt it back home. So we come from a minority group in Iraq, religious minority that was persecuted for quite some time, and then lots of people had to leave anyway. So now we're down to about 500 people across the entire country. It completely died out and scattered across the world. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how this also became my research topic of interest, because I can tap into personal experience within that. And at the same time I was developing my PhD, I was also working with an immigration lawyer to get my parents out of Iraq. So just imagine the feat of the job that I was trying to do, working in a different language, also trying to make ends meet financially. I was working in the evenings and weekends to help sustain, but also I was feeling this incredible urge to want to get them out as soon as possible. Right at the same time, I was offering a lot of support, and I offered free support, which I'm not saying this is a good practice, but I had to do it in order for me to feel seen and heard. I see you, but back 20 years ago, when Plymouth had one Iraqi PhD student, and that was me, I was not seen. No one knew who I am. So I went from being a top, supervisor's pet back home to a nobody in this country. And that took a long time with the confidence, with the language, with trying to really engage. And one of the ways that I had to do that is by offering to teach for free in this institution, which I have. I'm not advocating for it at all, but it was one of the routes for me to engage in academia because I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And a job application came up, and all of my colleagues in architecture said, "Apply." I was like, "I'm still doing my PhD, I can't apply." I said, "Just apply." I applied, I got it. It was one of few, and actually in the field, it's dying out now that an offer of a permanent position full-time comes, so that was 15 years ago. I got the job, and that was me. So I've been here for 20 years, stuck and moving forward, both at the same time, I feel. So I'm going to linger a little bit more on this, because I think that was one of the proudest moments where I kind of felt I needed to really make a space for myself. My research was definitely stable, and I felt that I'm doing something, but I had questioned what the worth of the research that I was working on so many times and so many days where I would think, why am I doing this? Why is this important? Why is anyone going to be interested in this? And wanted to quit on several occasions because I kind of felt there's obviously other stuff that I want to engage in that were already piping up in terms of interest for me that would have taken me slightly differently to what I was doing in my PhD, but I couldn't do them because I was restricted in that space still. And I did, in the end, decide to shift my work, but after I finished the PhD. One thing got me over that hump is to think that in order for you to sit in front of examiners to discuss your research wasn't about the content as much as about coming across knowing the field, but also knowing how to be a researcher, how to actually engage with being incredibly agile to things that might come at you from different angles. That change was definitely the thing that dominated the conversation in my viva, because they were really interested to ask me. I had 2 external examiners, not one, because I was teaching at the time, so I had a teaching contract. And I wanted it to be people that I potentially want to work with in the future. So I always make sure that you work with your supervisors on getting the right team for you. I had one of the top examiners from UCL and another from Edinburgh University, because I also wanted to prove to myself that what I've done is good enough to hold not only nationally in this country, but also top people that I would have loved to work with as well. I think that pivotal moment where I kind of sat in front of them defending or having that conversation, and it was a conversation, and I was kind of maybe had a really good experience because they knew me as a member of staff as well, and I have already been engaging with research alongside other things that I was doing within my own academic career. But what was really interesting is that that conversation wasn't about the content of the thesis as much as it was about knowing that there is this eagerness and hunger for a strong research career and an academic kind of leadership that has come through that dialogue and conversation. So the viva itself was incredibly difficult to go through, and I completely agree with a lot of the kind of the points that you raised on having confidence, having the language issues, the pressure of knowing that you're a member of staff and all of the staff, as well as your students, are waiting to hear back at the end of that door, was the pressure of, you know, has it been all worth it, but also, am I going to be okay at the end of this? So there was a lot of pressure from multiple angles to actually get it right. I don't know if I did get it right. I got corrections in the end, minor corrections, but I did get corrections. And this is a thing that you also need to understand is if you treat it as a project that has a beginning and an end, and it's not your life, because your life will continue beyond the PhD, and it will exist way beyond that. If you just treat it as this is a project, I need to go in, finish what I said I'm going to do, and then move on to whatever I want to do later on. What I didn't have was mentorship. I did have a good team. They weren't the greatest teams. They're all retired, so I can slag them off now. But definitely the fact that there was a number of men involved in this process, and I didn't have that mentor, and I call them mentorships. There wasn't that layer of support that I would have loved to have in order for me to feel that safe space that I can kind of be myself, make the mistakes, and it's okay to make those mistakes as I went along. This photograph of my graduation, it was 7 months after I finished my the submission of my corrections, but I was 9 months pregnant with my first at the time. So going then, even though I had an academic career already and I had that contract, going then into immediately giving birth and going into a maternity leave for 7 months, I couldn't afford to go for longer, and then going back into academia was like, whoa, what happened to my brain? You know, people who had children would understand this. Your brain going to mush, but also the multitasking that happens within the first few years of the life of a child, for a mum or a dad is incredible. I think for the mums more, because we keep all of the information, we don't filter as quickly, I suppose. And I was juggling the cooking and the kind of cleaning and all of those things, as well as having to think about my students and that child that was at nursery that I needed to run between talks and tutorials to breastfeed them back. And I did this, and then 3 years later I had my second child, and yet again I went through exactly the same thing. Now I've got 2 children under the age of 5, with all of what's going on with a full-time job demand. What was really interesting is I did use my second maternity leave to readjust and think what I want to do with my life. And at that point, I decided that it's okay that my research hasn't picked up, because I really wanted to focus and shift it completely differently to what I did in my PhD. So my PhD looked at how architecture can engage with different types of representation in the world, depending on the representation that comes from the global south to the from the global north to the global south, and the amounts of different ways of knowledge creation that the global south depend on the global north for. And I was trying to reverse that back. So it's still in the same vein, but I completely changed my research to pick up on a very important thing, which is the history and the experience that I had in life as a war survivor, but also I lived through several other wars before as a minoritized sect within my own home country, where I kind of didn't feel belonging in the same way that people would feel with their home country. So there was this really interesting development coming throughout my research that meant that I moved on from the representation of architecture to looking at how people engage with their environments, coming from really kind of distort spaces, whether it's war, whether it's famine, whether it's persecution, whether it's... So I worked on developing a research network, which was called the Displacement Studies Research Network, that I put together with different people coming from different backgrounds. We worked on engaging to highlight people's unheard voices, marginalized groups, and we worked on action research type work. And publications started to come in, and I got promoted into associate professor in 2018. So this is 10 years after I started my career. Men who are in exactly the same age as me, started with me, have become professors 5 years before me. And this is normal. We hear about it all the time. And we hear how many women get knocked in promotion applications, regardless of all of that history, because that history that I just told you about having maternity leaves and about all of those things that I engaged with isn't part of what you submit as evidence, even though it is supposed to be considered, but it's not considered to the same level as how many list of publications you've engaged with. I also found one of the things that I found really useful was social media, and I don't mean Twitter right now, because Twitter right now has gone down the toilet. Twitter when it first started. So 7-10 years ago, I made an incredible network out of this, just engaging with people who are like-minded but also doing research similar to mine across several institutions across the globe. And that also made a really interesting entity to a new network that I started, which was the Justice and Imagination in Global Displacement. So this looks at a lot of different, again, sectors within, so we engage with NGOs, we engage with United Nations, we engage with different organizations working on the ground with displaced people, again, across the globe. But my predominant work is in the Middle East because of my background as well. So then I started getting pulled into research consultancy, which I did for Oxford University in Heritage Studies. And again, publications started flowing in, co-edited books started coming in. And I think that is when you start to think, shouldn't that be enough to get promoted? No, a bit more. COVID-19 hit. What COVID-19 did to women in academia is much worse. And I know men hate me for saying this, but we did get a lot more hammering down in terms of homeschooling children and in terms of looking after the house, as well as putting a face in front of Zoom to teach you guys and teach our undergrads. But it was one of the things that absolutely hammered research badly and the progress of women's research. And it's been, lots of studies have come out of this, proving this. And I had 3 grants rejected, literally one after the other, so the disappointment kept on coming. But then later on, after getting a couple of smaller grants, I decided that maybe it's time for me to start working on a book, which I've been saving the idea for, but also leaving it at an arm's length and not very close to me for quite some time, which is looking at how Iraqis responded to the war and violence over the past 20 years. So the book is coming out next year with Bloomsbury. In the last bit of it, writing the monograph, and it looks at across Iraq, so from the north to the south, and I'm engaged with a lot of people on the ground to get this work done. The work also got exhibited in LSE, the Middle East Centre, so this is the London School of Economics in London, who have a Middle East Centre, but also they were doing an event on the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq in March. And that meant that more awareness and publicity of the book, but also of the project that I was working on. So this is my work. I work on maps, and I work on detailing how those environments could be reconstructed for us to understand potentially how we can use people's responses from a spatial perspective to understand how we can support humanitarian work in terms of getting people displaced or having suffered from displacement or war and violence within